Welcome to the Shame-Free Zone. I'm Veronica Monet, and my guest today is a friend and colleague. His name is Ricardo Scipio. We haven't actually met on video before, but we've talked over the phone many times and done podcasts together. And you don't know much about him yet, so let me read his bio. But first, Ricardo, I'm so glad you're joining me today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to have fun today.
I hope so. I'm a little scared, but I hope so.
Well, I'm always, you know what? You're a wild ride, and so am I. But we always have fun when we talk. So it's going to be, and I promise I'll be gentle.
Okay. I've heard that one. I've heard that one before.
I know. You should never believe me when I say that. Okay. Well, here's something about Ricardo. He's a Trinidad-born director, actually, and he has a reputation for making unique, multi-layered, provocative work in film and photography. His first feature film, Juan, was a brutal and comedic portrayal of dysfunctional, struggling actresses in New York. His second feature film, Watershed, was the first independent feature film in North America to be shot in digital high definition, breaking ground with its technical and narrative accomplishments. His third feature film, Finder of Lost Children, set in the Caribbean community of Canada, is a poignantly moving and humorous story of two half-sisters that meet for the very first time at the funeral of the father neither one of them knew. Now, Ricardo grew up in Toronto, and he attended both the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design and the University of Waterloo. He started his art career as a fashion photographer and then later as a fine art nude photographer. That's actually when I first met Ricardo.
Yes.
He has had 14 gallery shows of his work, and his first book of photographs, a collaboration with noted Canadian poet George Eliot Clark, was published in the November of 2005. His second book, The Goddess Project, was completed in 2010. That was a book of nudes of Black women entitled, oh no, I'm sorry, I got confused. Goddess was women of all different races. But then there was a book of nudes specifically about Black women, which was entitled, and Ricardo, you might have to help me with this word, Usuri,
yes. Very good.
Oh, I said it right. And that was finalized in 2011. And as you might suspect, he's such an ambitious guy. He's never idle for long. So he's completed photographing his fourth book, The Goddess Project 2, and that was in 2012. His fifth book, oh my God, I'm getting tired just reading this, Ricardo.
I know, you can just skip over and let them know I've done 10 books.
I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read it. And so we got The Goddess Project 3 in 2015, The Sex Goddess Project Book 1 in 2016, The Sex Goddess Project Book 2 in 2018, and Book 3 of the series in 2019, Book 4 in 2020. Oh my God. And Ricardo has recently started his 10th book, The Intimacy Project. Oh my God, you are so busy. Anyway, so obviously a very energetic, creative, out of the box guest. Ricardo, we've got a really interesting topic today. We're going to be talking about how one knows the difference between attraction to somebody who happens to be of a different race and whether or not they're fetishizing that person in a way that could actually constitute racism. And I just, first of all, want to thank you so much for taking on this topic. I also want to thank myself for it because it's a little bit scary in some ways. I've definitely had interracial relationships, and I'm looking forward to learning from your wisdom and your insights and your personal experience. Is there anything you want to say about that right out the box?
Sure. I appreciate you taking on this topic. No one has really specifically asked me to discuss this, so it's an opportunity for me, and it's definitely sort of, it's got different sensitivities and different things to balance in the discussion of it. So it's a challenge. So yeah, I appreciate the challenge.
Well, one of the things that I really appreciate about you is that you are not you're not shy around sexual topics. So I really thought this would be a great conversation for you and I to share. It's interesting because I was just reading one author, and I want to make sure I don't misattribute her. So Shenandoah Brown actually wrote something about, I think she was coming from the asexual standpoint, but she said that she feels that all sex is utility. And then in a lot of ways, she kind of sees sexuality as it presents itself in the dominant culture as inherently racist. That feels like an overbroad statement to me. You have any comments about that?
I think it's always dangerous to read books on these kind of subjects.
Okay.
For
All right,
one,
well, talking about
for
the
what?
then.
For one, I mean, someone would have to be like very opinionated to have the stamina to write a whole book on one topic.
Yeah.
So you'll tend to get sort of polarizing opinions a lot of the times. Real life is pretty messy and complicated, and it doesn't necessarily lend itself to an easy book, to sell and to be able to pinpoint where on the spectrum the book's point of view is. So my initial thought is sex, like everything else, is pretty individualistic. People have sex for many different reasons, on many different levels, in many different ways. So I think it would be difficult to say sex is inherently this or inherently that. It's a lot of different things to a lot of different people, which, it's harder to write that kind of book. It's harder to, that's a harder position to talk about, but that would be what I would say is you can't really encapsulate it that easily into one thing or the other.
Yeah, I think sweeping statements like that miss all the grays that necessarily define life. But I want to ask you, I'm assuming, and this may be a faulty assumption on my part, but you're an attractive Black man. I'm thinking you probably have felt fetishized in a way that felt distancing at some time in your life. Is that true? Am I right about that?
It's a constant daily thing. It's not, I wish it was only sometimes in my life. I wish there was some break from it, some time where it doesn't happen, but it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And it's a real double whammy, because not only does the outside world and the outside culture fetishize, people like me, but we also fetishize ourselves, which makes it the double whammy.
That was something I read about in Forbes, of all places, too, is the fetishizing within communities. So not all just coming from other races and outside. So let's back up a little bit. The first thing I'd love for you to share is, how do you know when you are being fetishized by another person? What is it? How does it taste, look, smell, feel? Can you just kind of give us some insight into that?
It's sort of like racism itself. How do you know if someone is being racist towards you? One, I think it's circumstantial, right? Like, what are the circumstances? What is the power exchange going on, in the moment?
Right.
So for example, if a cop pulls me over for, no good reason, I don't really need to spend a lot of time analyzing if that may be racist or not. Chances are it is.
And
and if some white man tells me that, his fantasy is to, see me give my nigger cock to his wife, I don't really have to spend a lot of time, analyzing that. And that does happen.
Does that happen on the regular?
Depends on your definition of regular, but it's happened to me too many times.
Wow.
I mean, we could do a whole.
I'm sorry. So excuse the white girl who hasn't a clue here, but I am shocked.
Why?
And so gross. It's so presumptuous and gross and objectifying and distancing.
Well, here's the thing.
I even would go so far as to say demeaning, and I guess I would feel like people would be, even if they were thinking it, even if they were masturbating to it in the privacy of their own bathroom, to actually say it to your face just feels like a whole nother level. I can't even.
Well, here's the thing. There are some people that look for opportunities to say things like that. It's not, for them, it's a very charged opportunity when they get, to say that. And I've had people say that to me in the context of a party,
Right.
like just a party, or have said it to me in tennis, have said it to me, in lots of different contexts. So for some people, it's not a word that they're going to go out of their way to avoid. It's sometimes a word, that they're going to look for opportunities to use. But
right. Okay. So they think by putting a racial slur with a sexual quote unquote compliment that they're going to get by with it. Is that your read on that?
No, I mean, this is complicated.
Yeah.
For some people, it's an opportunity to both degrade me and degrade, the wife. For some white men,
right.
The most degrading thing they can think of is, to, see their white wife with a black guy. And don't get me wrong, there's also some people that's, the most lovely thing they can think of seeing. I mean, like I said, there's a whole spectrum out there. That's why it's difficult to, lump all these things into one category or the other. But I'll just give you an example just to be specific.
Yeah.
There was a couple that approached me online, for a threesome. And the man sent me a script of what he wanted to have happen and what he wanted to say and what he wanted me to say. And part of that script was him being able to use the N-word and basically sort of treat me like I was a farm animal and to say degrading things to his wife about his wife while his wife was servicing me. And obviously, I declined the opportunity, if you want to call that an opportunity.
Yeah.
But what bothered me more than this couple thinking that this was an okay thing to do,
Yeah.
what bothered me more was there were many black guys before me that didn't hesitate to agree to that script so they could get some extra pussy. And that made me.
This isn't even a paying gig.
No, this wasn't a gig. It was a date.
This is just free hookups.
Yes.
Oh.
And to make matters worse, neither the husband or wife were particularly attractive. So it wasn't like there was this amazing, sexy, gorgeous couple that these black guys couldn't resist getting with, and then they, volunteered to be abused in order to get at, this hot couple. This couple was not hot. This couple was not young. This couple was, I think the guy was in his early 60s and the wife was in early 50s.
Yeah.
So it was just bothersome to me on many levels, but what particularly bothered me was the willingness of other, black men to fetishize themselves and to allow themselves to be exploited and, and disrespected for this.
Yeah.
And with language, it's common in the kink community and the swinging community to use language around, Black men and women, such as calling us chocolate. I mean, here, that's what we're commonly referred to as chocolate. And people would say, oh, I've got to get me some chocolate, or I can't wait to get some chocolate, or I want your chocolate, or give me some of your chocolate. And I don't think that they're intentionally trying to be, harmful. I just think there's a lack of awareness, a lack of understanding the history. To them, chocolate's a great thing. Who doesn't like chocolate, right? Yeah, to be reduced, to that, instead of being a fully realized human being, it's, for me, I'm not cool with that. But again, disappointingly, lots of, Black people are okay with that. I'm not going to say the majority, but too many.
Too many.
Because if we all did a Black Lives Matter type of reaction to that kind of tradition would end very quiquely. But because
sensitivity in the BDSM community, obviously, for a while I was a pro dom. I've never encountered this aspect of the kink community, and it's very appalling to me. And
the kink community is part of the community. So
yeah,
the kink community is not going to be exempt from racism or exploitation.
No, but I guess I expected more because everything's negotiated. It's supposed to be safe, sane, and consensual, and a lot of times vanilla people don't get that. I know because I work with a lot of vanilla couples who do not even get consent in their context of their marriage. And BDSM community, kink community really puts a high premium on educating yourself to those things. So
sure, but that's
what you say. I'm sorry, go
ahead.
Yeah,
and I agree with you. As far as those transactional interactions, consent is there. And even with that couple, they sent me that script because they wanted my consent to do those things.
right.
But I don't think the issue is consent. The issue is culture. And the kink community is dominated by white people. Black people do not have power in the kink community.
Yeah.
As far as what I've seen. So
yeah.
we haven't had input in the culture. So the kink community has its own culture, has its own
Right.
language, has its own customs, and they didn't ask us about it.
Well,
it was done in a vacuum without us.
Absolutely, and I'm just curious. Like one of the issues in kink and BDSM communities around misogyny is that sometimes you've got male dominants who are tying up and flogging female submissives. And it's consensual, but when you think of the cultural context, sometimes you wonder how consensual is it really, how much of, and I'm not opposed to it. But for myself, I would never actually allow a man to do that to me. I let a female dominatrix do it to me because to me that felt safer. It wasn't as triggering for me. But
yes.
I don't know, you're still talking about handcuffs and sometimes shackles, and that goes right back to slavery in a lot of ways.
Yes.
So I don't
know.
Yeah, I'd just like to hear your thoughts and feelings about it.
No, I think you've brought up a great point. I think there's some parallels between what people of color go through as far as being fetishized and exploited and what women have gone through, regarding being fetishized and exploited. Yeah. And I think consent requires agency and requires, some degree of self-esteem. So if someone's consenting to something because of poor self-esteem and because of a lack of agency, it's not really the highest level of consent.
No.
It's, you know,
Um,
it's minimal, you know, consent. So yeah, I think, you know, again, these issues, you know, are a bit complicated, and the, you know,
yeah.
specific to the people involved. I mean, I think it is possible for you know, a cis male to dominate, you know, a cis female in a way that might be cool. Although I think, you know, you would have to be careful. I mean, if, you know, and I think definitely people, if they wanted to, could do race play, as it's called in the kink community. But I
Right.
think that has to be done like really carefully. And, you know, I think most of the time it's not.
Yeah, you know, this wasn't a kinky relationship. It was, I was in college and I was, I think, about 19 or 20. And I was in a relationship with a Black man. And he fetishized, one time he wanted us to stand in front of the mirror naked so he could kind of fetishize the color of his skin against my skin. And I remember feeling really distanced and objectified in that moment. I was kind of like, whoa, what are we doing here? This doesn't feel comfortable. I was very young. It was my first interracial relationship. So I didn't really have much of a narrative around that. I just remember in my gut, I was like, well, this isn't how I feel about you. And why do you feel this way about me or us, you know? So, I mean, listening to some of the stuff that you're sharing has actually kind of made me nauseous. So, you know, I guess that's me.
Sorry.
No, that's the conversation that we wanted to have. So please don't be sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I want to understand how it is for you. Of course, I'll never fully understand because I don't have your skin color, but it's eye-opening.
Yeah, and I think being a woman, you know, you can understand that, you know, to some degree, because I think there are some things about it that might be interchangeable.
Yeah.
So your opening question was, how do you tell if it's real attraction or if it's, you know, a racial fetish?
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple of things. I think respect is one of the ways that you can tell. And I've had many conversations with people about cultural appropriation. Like, how can you tell if someone's appropriating someone else's culture, or if they're just someone that loves, you know, that culture?
Yeah.
And in the 70s, when I was growing up, one of the big things that was happening was kung fu movies. And, you know, every Black kid in my neighborhood just loved Bruce Lee and loved kung fu movies, and we dress up in kung fu uniforms and do all this stuff. And you have, you know, a rap group like the Wu-Tang Clan, I think, that totally, you know, came up because of that.
Yeah.
And, you know, is that cultural appropriation? Probably, but it, you know, it was motivated by respect and love. And I could see myself, for example, as a Black person, you know, studying martial arts, going to China or Japan or Korea to learn further martial arts, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, you know, I would constantly check in with myself and say, you know, is this something I'm doing out of a heartfelt motivation?
Yeah.
Am I doing it with respect? Am I listening for feedback from the people whose culture I'm getting into, and making sure that I'm not disrespecting it? And am I making sure that how I present myself is authentic, or am I presenting myself inauthentically? So, for example, no matter how much I was into Kung Fu, I wouldn't change my name to a Chinese name. I think that would be, you know, crossing the line. You know, so, you know, I think, again, you know, it depends on each individual situation. So I think, yeah, I think there are lots of non-white people that love the way that, you know, Black people or people of color look. and some people, it goes much deeper than that. They love the culture, they love the music, they love the food, they love the traditions, and some of that is really, really, genuine. Some of it, is fetish. Some of it, if your main interest in a Black man is his cock and not his history and his worldview, and and the sound of his voice and the way he looks at you and the way he touches you or whatever, and that's some of the ways that I can tell. Like, if I get approached by someone and their first question is, what is the size of your cock? And I know that's a pretty clear indication that that their interest in me is not going to be very profound. And that does happen. And it's just funny because I just think, what should I ask in response? Should I ask, what is the diameter of your vaginal canal? Like,
Wow.
I don't know what to say, but
I think that sounds like a great comeback, actually.
Yeah, I've never done it.
I'll tell you what, you could actually say, some sexologists, you could say this. Well, before I answer that question, I understand that vaginas run anywhere from 4 inches to 12 inches long. So before I answer the question, I need you to tell me, how long is your vagina?
There you go. Okay.
And they would not have any answer at all.
Yes.
And they'd probably be very offended. Good. Oh my God, you're really opening my eyes. I just didn't, and I'm hearing a lot of this is in the kink community, the play community, where obviously, when I think about the swingers community, that really came out of a bunch of white guys. And I've often encountered what I considered misogyny and sexism in those communities. I expected more from the kink communities because I've actually worked and taught in them. But thank you for educating me to this. And maybe there's something those of us that are sex educators can actually start doing to raise the bar here and create some awareness. Now, I know that you are an educator yourself in your own right. Is there anything that I don't know if any of this is approached in any of your films or not, but I'm even curious.
Well, sure. I mean, my first film about the 5 dysfunctional struggling actresses in New York, the main character is a half Black, half Cherokee Indian woman.
Okay.
And her whole story is about how, she's judged and rejected based on her appearance because she's not, quote unquote, Black looking enough for the stereotypically Black parts. And she definitely looks too ethnic and too exotic for the white parts. So she was getting no parts. And, and definitely people would make all kinds of inappropriate, comments to her, calling her tangy and spicy and, these kinds of, things. So yeah, I mean, that was an element of, of my first film for sure. I think that one of the things that may help improve the situation is if people took cultural sensitivity and racial sensitivity more seriously in the kink community. It's not, as far as I'm aware, it's not even discussed. I haven't heard of it being discussed. And
I haven't either, Ricardo. I have to admit that when I think to the kink places that I have been to, whether it was in San Francisco or Seattle, I don't remember seeing any people of color there.
Bingo.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. I think that I, as a white person, thought that kink would be triggering for BIPOC because it's too close to slavery, and therefore I kind of thought of it as a game that only white people play because they don't have any cultural heritage in that, or if they do, it's way, way back, thousands of years. What do you think about that?
No, I don't think that's an issue. I think
Okay.
I can speak for Black people. Can't really speak for Asians or South Asians or other people necessarily, or Indigenous people. But for Black people, it's difficult when you're not when you enter a space that's just so predominantly white, and it's not just the kink community, it's Burning Man, it's
Right.
there's so many aspects of white liberal culture that is just so white dominated that it's not very inviting for people of color. In California, for the first and only time in my life, I went to a swingers party that was all Black people. I think there was only one white person there. And it was a completely different situation.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, because in Canada, I mean, Canada doesn't even have 1/10 the amount of Black people as America does per capita. I mean, one could almost say there's almost no Black people in Canada, really.
Yeah.
So for me, it was just amazing to be in a sex positive situation that wasn't completely white dominated.
Yes.
Because in contrast to that, the very first time, I've only been to a sex club twice in my life. And the first time I went, I only stayed 20 minutes because when I arrived, I was the only Black guy there, and there's a bunch of sort of muscular white guys, and they looked like cops. And later on, I found out that they were cops.
Oh.
and as soon as I entered the door, I heard them whispering underneath their breath, "What's he doing here?"
Oh, yeah.
And I was getting dirty looks and stuff like that, and I was like, "Wow!" And I only stayed for 20 minutes because clearly, it wasn't a space meant for me, and they were not.
What city was that in?
I'm sorry?
What city was that in?
Oh, it was here in Vancouver, Canada.
Okay. All right. I want to know, when you went to the California swing space that was almost all Black, did you see less or experience less fetishizing, or was there fetishizing there too?
No, there was no. Well, there was fetishizing because it's a fetish type situation, but it was no racial fetishizing. The only kinds of fetishizing I saw were some of the guys were like muscle guys, and they had like these tight, muscle shirts on, and they were super ripped. And I definitely saw many women enjoying, being in proximity to those super studs, and definitely it was a very sort of hip hop kind of infused environment, which was kind of cool. But ironically, it turned me off a bit because the hip hop music they were playing, every second word was the N-word.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Which is common in bad hip hop.
Yeah.
But all in all, it was an interesting experience because I was not the exotic one. I wasn't getting any attention, based on, my race or color.
Right.
I could just be a person. And so I was one of the non-muscle bound guys. And I think I was also the oldest guy there. So I was able to be me. I was able to be a guy, and at the time I think I was 50. I was able to be a 50-year-old guy, who doesn't, like bad hip hop. It had nothing to do with, didn't have to worry about my race. So yeah, that was very refreshing.
Did you have a good time?
I did have a good time.
Okay, glad. I want to talk a little bit about how you know if somebody is attracted to you because of who you are as opposed to what you are. And I think in some ways that's what we're talking about. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it is a complicated and difficult topic because oftentimes when people first meet each other, and just taking race off the table here, there are certain ways in which people kind of know what they're attracted to. A heterosexual person is usually not attracted to somebody of the same gender. And a gay person is not usually attracted to somebody of the opposite gender. So, and then, it starts getting, there's a way in which we accept that. We like, okay, we respect that. That's your preference, your sexual preference. But if a man like only dates big busted blonde women, it's his choice, certainly, and is right, I guess, but I will make an assumption that he's a sexist idiot. I will,
Sure.
because
Sure.
I'll just feel like, oh, okay, so they're not people, they're just interchangeable parts. And, I can think of some guys who's like divorced one woman and wind up with another one who looks just like her. And it's like, do you even know what's in their hearts and their heads, or are you just looking at the outside? And
sure.
I suppose if when I think about somebody who only dates a cisgender white male who only dates Asian women, I also find that really off-putting. Now I'm going to go so far as to say infuriating, especially if he travels to an Asian country and kind of brings her back to the States. I get very suspicious about these mail order bride things where it's like, oh yeah, women here in the United States are too uppity for you. So you got to go find somebody who wanted to get to the United States. And oftentimes those marriages don't work. My uncle went through about 2 or 3 of them.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I was always cheering the girl. They're all girls, he's older. I was cheering them on like, wait till you come to America. You're not going to stay with him very long because he's a sexist pig. But I mean, these are my biases and my emotional responses to these things. I'm just kind of wanting to see how you feel about the kind of the meta topic here about what if you meet a white woman who has had a long string of Black boyfriends? Would you trust her? Would you think that she had an authentic attraction, or would you think she was fetishizing in a way that was racist?
Well, that's a great question, and it's not so cut and dried. So for one, I think it would be good for us not to be too elitist and to allow for the fact that a certain percent of the population are going to be idiots. Come on, it's life.
You're my uncle. Okay.
So some people's love life and sex life are not going to be very evolved, according to our elitist definition of evolved. And so to some degree, you have to sort of live and let live. However, you can definitely call out, certain phenomena in society that you think, is troublesome or problematic. So yeah, I mean, I've dated white women who have only dated Black men, or who have majority dated Black men.
Yeah.
And it depends on the situation. Like one woman, she grew up in a Black neighborhood, and the next door family were Jamaicans, and they kind of adopted her, and she grew up with them, and that's what she likes. She only listens to Jamaican music. She loves, Jamaican and Caribbean food. For her, it was natural to be attractive to Black men. Her first crush was the boy next door.
Right.
So, and for her, she respects the culture and knows a lot about the culture. So I'm not so concerned about her motives or where she's coming from.
Right.
On the other hand, I've known women who have said, I only have sex with Black guys, and their penises have to be longer than 9 inches, and they have to be this and they have to be that, and the guys are fairly disposable to them. Some of them love to have multiple, Black man gangbangs and whatever, and that's all cool, to each their own. But I would say someone whose focus is so much on the physical and so much on, on the penis,
Yeah.
isn't necessarily someone who, respects who these men are in the context of who their families are, what their history is, what the culture is, who they are as in a more holistic sense. So, that kind of thing would be more problematic. And I have known white men and Black men that have only dated Asian women. So, definitely that happens. And there are Black women that only date white men. And that's not necessarily for a fetish reason per se. It's, sort of a reaction to the violence and dysfunction that Black men, have perpetrated against them. So they basically have said, okay, no more Black guys.
Right.
I'll stick with the white guys. For some people, it's a status thing. It's sort of like the O.J. Simpson phenomena. If you want to increase your status in society, what do? You get a white woman or a white man, because in society, if you show up with a white person on your arm, you've got more status than if you show up with a Black person on your arm. And so that's what O.J. Simpson did. As soon as he got rich and famous, he got himself, an 18-year-old white woman, and the first thing he did is made her get a boob job.
Oh yeah. I got nothing, no kind words for O.J. Simpson. But I have a question for you, because I kind of feel like if I'm thinking about an ex-boyfriend of mine, not the one that wanted us to stand in front of the mirror, a different one. It's just a relationship that I was in for 2 years. And it started off poly, and then it was just him and I towards the end. He was Black, and his other woman was white. To my knowledge, he'd never actually dated Black women. He'd only dated white women. And, after I got out of the relationship, he broke up with me, and I found myself feeling like, instead of it being a status symbol for him, it was like we were easier to manage. Now, that may be an assumption on my part that's even got some racial tinge to it. But I felt like maybe he had that assumption, or he was operating from that place. And do you think, you've never met him, you don't know anything about him, so I'm not asking you to weigh in on that, but do you think it's possible that some Black men would choose white women because they might think that they would be more malleable?
I don't know if they would be more malleable or not, but I think you, just like the Black women dating white men, you instantly will get to avoid certain issues within the Black community.
Yeah.
And within the Black community, just like any community, there's been lots of issues between men and women. For the Black community, it's very complicated because we've had our families and our communities devastated by racism and colonialism and all kinds of, different isms.
Right.
So for example, in my own family, my father's had 10 kids with five different women.
Yeah.
And this was something that was not too uncommon of his generation of men. He's 77 years old. And where that comes from is during slavery and even after slavery, there was a lot of pressure put on Black men to get as many Black women pregnant as possible. It was a way for slave owners to get free slaves. Instead of having to buy a slave, you just, got your slaves to make more slaves. And also there's sort of a cultural component to it. And that is when you self-esteem and self-confidence is totally decimated by being treated like an animal, worse than an animal. Probably lots of slave owners wouldn't treat their horse as badly as they would treat a Black male slave. One of the ways to gain self-esteem is to be, okay, I'm the big Black stud. I'm the big Black buck. And I can prove my manliness by how many, women I can get pregnant and what kind of ladies man I am,
Right.
And so that was one of the only ways that men of my father's generation could strut around like peacocks, because they didn't have money, they had no social status, they couldn't even normally get decent jobs. So that was one thing that happened. So there's a lot of history in the Black community that involves tensions between Black men and Black women. And so you could opt out of that to some degree by dating outside of the race. Definitely there's lots of issues you wouldn't have to discuss. There would be other issues that you'd have to discuss.
Right.
But yeah, some people would opt to not have to deal with those things, and some of those things involve multiple generations of trauma. Yeah,
and trauma does travel through the DNA. Science just proved that it goes at least 7 generations. So that's a real thing too. I don't want to conflate what it's like to be a woman with what it's like to be Black when it comes to some of the filters that we're looking through. Obviously, white women in particular are not shot dead by cops. They don't constitute the vast majority of the prison population. Voter suppression is not being levied against them. So many horrible things that I'm just, our nation is incredibly racist at this point. And,
not just your nation, almost, I mean, I can't really think of any non-racist nations. Can you think of any?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I've visited some countries like Papua New Guinea, which, is run by people with dark skin. I don't know. I don't know if they have racism.
But the colonial history of Papua New Guinea is pretty racist. The British colonial masters of Papua New Guinea. So
Australia actually turned it back over to them a few years ago. I think like 20 years ago. But yeah, you're right. Have you been there?
No.
Interesting. So
probably if I went there, I wouldn't come back.
Why?
Because it'd probably be fun,
I don't know. It's an interesting island. They've had they have like 700 different languages.
Wow.
And
Wow.
constant infighting between the different tribes. Used to
Yes.
use machetes on each other, so it has a brutal history. It's the land of the headhunter, believe it or not.
I do believe it.
Yeah. What I wanted to ask is, when I'm listening to you, I'm like thinking, when I'm looking for ways that I can empathize and relate and connect, which I think is something we all need to do. I want you to empathize and relate, even though you don't have a vagina. And I make the same effort, even though my skin color is different.
Mhm.
So again, careful not to say these are equated at all. But similarities that I see about how women have turned to their own sexualization because they were denied access to power and finances. So then, the goal, especially back in the 50s, was to marry well. It's changed a lot, and in some ways it hasn't changed much at all, because we still see women really putting a lot of emphasis on really kind of fetishizing themselves, because that's where we get our self-esteem. We weren't really applauded for excelling in sports or mechanics or business or finance. How does it land for you, my attempt to empathize and connect? Does it feel off-putting and racist? Does it feel genuine? I'm just kind of want to get a temperature check.
Well, it's good. I think what the world needs is more empathy and more sort of willingness to, have these uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
And I do see parallels between what you're saying. So as a Black man, for example, we've fetishized ourselves because of a lack of access to power. So when society tells you that you're only going to be valued if you're an entertainer or if you're an athlete, then what do? You internalize that and you're like, okay, I'm going to be, super Black athlete. And
Right.
if you just look at one sport, like the sport of boxing, for example, you have a sport where it's, there was some periods of recent history where it was almost like a religion with, the era of Muhammad Ali and the era of Mike Tyson and other eras.
Yeah.
And there was a group fetishization of those Black bodies. And we gleefully watched them beat the shit out of each other and cause each other major brain damage and sometimes kill each other, because we all bought into this fetish and continue to buy into it of, this is an acceptable way of displaying masculine power, masculine speed, masculine grace. And, where were the voices saying, this is terrible, this should stop, this should not be allowed? I didn't hear a lot of those voices growing up as a kid where everyone was into Muhammad Ali, including myself. So,
well, guilty as charged. I met Muhammad Ali several years ago, the night he got lost in San Francisco because his
Parkinson's?
brain injury was such that he needed to be accompanied by a bodyguard all the time. And apparently they let him out of sight for 5 minutes, and then they were looking for him that night. It was really sad. He's a really nice guy, though. Really, but at least, I only met him at a party, so I really don't know him that well. But what I felt in my heart was a sweet guy.
He probably was a sweet guy. And
that's how my daughter says, and I believe her too. I think both of those things can be true.
Yeah, so I mean, to this day, we still fetishize, Black male and female athletes. And it's a real sort of double-edged kind of thing. I mean, Serena Williams, for example,
right?
She's lauded for her ability as a tennis player, considered the greatest female tennis player of all time, but she's constantly criticized for her Black body. She's constantly criticized for having thighs that are too big, a butt that's too big, breasts that are too big, that she's not feminine enough, that, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And, it's terrible because they shouldn't be even be, I mean, why are they talking about her butt? She's the greatest tennis player of all time, and they're talking about her butt, or they're talking about how they don't like her cat suit that she's wearing, and whatever. No one's talking about Maria Sharapova's butt or lack of butt.
Lack of butt. Thank you. It's the same thing with Obama and Michelle. It was like the white suit. Big scandal with Obama was his white suit, and Michelle Obama. They thought she looked too gangly in high heels, whatever, too tall.
You can't win.
Well, it's racism trying to hide itself, I guess. I don't even know if they're trying to hide it, frankly. But so I'm hearing that it's not much better in Canada. That's really disheartening.
Oh, I think it's worse in Canada.
Really?
I do. Because again, think of the United States. United States, you do have a Barack Obama. You do have a Muhammad Ali. You've had so many Black people that have risen to such high levels. Yeah. And you have Black cities. I mean, I spent time in Atlanta, 70% Black. I've spent time, in lots of different places. And so there you go. There is Black power in the United States. There is Black culture. I mean, if you think about what the Black American community have given to the world, things like jazz and hip hop and rock and roll, and you could just keep going on. We don't have that in Canada. In fact, Canada, I don't think has ever created a genre of music, or genre of music I'm familiar with, Black or white.
Yes.
We didn't create soul food like all the different soul food that America has. Yes, we have Drake and The Weeknd, but there hasn't been a legacy of powerful Black Canadians. We certainly, not only have we not had a Black prime minister, I don't even think we've had a Black person as a mayor of a major city in Canada.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so America's doing great. Maybe
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say that. I would not say that. But 13 or 14% of the population of America is Black. 13 or 14% of the population is Latinx. Yeah. That's a lot of power. That's tens of millions of people, who can vote, who can put their economic power to bear.
And thanks. I'll tell you something. The way I and a lot of my progressive friends feel is that Black women saved American democracy this last year. I was specifically thinking about Stacey Abrams and Oprah Winfrey.
Totally. I couldn't agree with you more.
Without their efforts, I think America would now be a dictatorship.
Sure, and you have people in America like Donna Brazile, for example, and there is no equivalent to her in Canada. So definitely, Stacey Abrams, Donna Brazile, and lots of other less heralded people are very key. And with a country as polarized as yours, just even a small sliver of the population can swing elections if they come out and vote.
Yeah. I could talk to you for another hour or two, Ricardo. I love when we get together and talk. I'm also watching the clock, and I realize I've got a client in a few minutes. I want
to lucky client.
Sweet, thank you. I want to bring it back to your book about Black goddesses. if we could just touch upon that a little bit, the ways in which you were celebrating Black women's bodies. Do you want to share a little bit of that with our viewers today?
Sure. This goes back. I started that project in 1990. But what happened was that I was walking around and I was just noticing lots of Black people walking around with their heads down. And it struck me. And I was like, do these people not realize how beautiful they are? Because if they did realize that, they would walk differently. And I looked at my own mom. I mean, my mom's had a tough life. She grew up in an orphanage and worked as a waitress all her life. And I just thought, my mom's so beautiful. And I've just seen so much beauty in the Black community. I mean, there's beauty everywhere, but there's a certain kind of beauty in the Black community, because when you look at those faces, those are some ancient faces. And I had so when I started the project, I was spending a lot of time in Miami, and Miami has a big Haitian population, and Haitians have more sort of undiluted African blood in them than probably any other group in the Black diaspora. And I just saw those Haitian faces, and they're so beautiful and so varied. And I was like, wow, I gotta photograph this. And it was not an easy sell. I mean, back in 1990, to convince, women who had only recently, come from Haiti to pose nude for an art project wasn't an easy sell. So I think at the beginning, I had like an 80% rejection rate.
Okay, but you are a very persistent guy.
Not in those days.
No?
Not in those days. No. I've realized over time that I have to be persistent, that things are not going to be handed to me. Things are not going to be easy, particularly the challenging things I choose to do. But back then, I was very sensitive and still sensitive, but it was hard. I mean, it was heartbreaking sometimes, because you'd see this amazing person and you knew you could make amazing art together, and they weren't into it. In fact, sometimes they would be hostile. So luckily, 20% of people said yes, 80% said no. So I was able to do the project, and it was great doing the project. But after doing the project, nobody would let me show it.
Oh.
No galleries were interested. No magazines were interested. No one was interested. People would say to me, like, if we put Black women in our magazine, no one would buy it. and galleries would say we could never put this show on. We would have protests from Christians, protests from Muslims. People would, be angry, whatever. So I just decided to do it myself. So I started having my own gallery shows, and the first gallery show that I had was in a community center in the Black ghetto of Miami. And I had to do everything. Like, they wouldn't even print invitations for me. I had to print my own invitations and everything. And so I put up the show, and it was great because people came. Like, the first night, like, these 275 people came. And then,
Congratulations.
Yeah, and people just kept coming and coming. And mothers would come and they would cry, and they would come back the next night with their daughters, or come back the next night with their mothers. And they would cry often because they said, we've never seen this kind of show, and we've never seen ourselves this way, and it's so beautiful, and all that kind of stuff. And they would say things like, it took me over 5 minutes to even realize that these women were nude. Because I shot nudes in color in natural landscapes, and it wasn't sexualized work. It was very sort of non-sexual nudes.
Right.
And yeah, and there were no protests, no Christians protested, no Muslims protested. Even the black newspaper in Miami, which was a very conservative paper, they put five color photos. They normally didn't have color on those pages, but they spent extra money to print color to put those pictures in. So
Wow.
so that was kind of how it went. So I had 14 shows of that work, and every time I would have to arrange my own shows. No one would give me shows. So I showed in black galleries and black community centers here in Canada and in the States. And it was great. I lost a lot of money. I lost like about $90,000 doing it. And I didn't have that money, so I starved. But I was able to do it. And I was able to show in New Orleans, show in Pittsburgh, show, in Orlando, and I showed at the Zora Neale Hurston Museum in Edenville, Florida, and just different places, and in Toronto and whatever. So that was great. But after a while, I was like, I can't keep doing gallery shows because they're very expensive. So I decided, that I wanted to publish a book. And again, no one wanted to publish it. Most of the new book publishers are based in Switzerland, in Zurich, and they mostly publish in black and white, and they only seem interested in books that have thin 20-year-old white women with their ribs showing. That seems to be the thing. And they were like, no one would buy your book. We're not going to publish it. So it took me 11 years to find someone willing to publish the book. But finally, I met a black woman who was editor of this publishing company in Canada. And she basically told them that if they didn't publish the book, she would quit. And so that's how the book got published. She still quit anyways. I think she wasn't happy about how reluctant they were to publish the book, I think. But yeah, that's how my first book got published.
Well, I am so grateful to you for all the courage that you expressed. We've talked about a lot of topics out on the edges of what things most people won't take on. And I just have huge admiration for you. I really do. And I know we're going to talk again. I'm going to put all the links at the bottom of this interview, but I would love it if you just told our viewers right now, because we've got live audience right now too, how they can get a copy of that book.
Well, that book, they would need to look for on Amazon, and I'm not sure if it's still in print, but they can look for it. It's called Illuminated Verses. They can look for that on Amazon. If that book was published by a publisher, all my other books I've published myself. So if people want to have a look at my more recent work, they can go to sexnotporn.com, and that will connect them to some of my other work. Just be aware it's very non-safe for work. It's nudity and sex, but it's very body positive and very sex positive. I photograph people of all shapes, sizes, colors, ages, gender identities, and and I'm working on the new book. The last book was done in a pandemic, and that was tricky. This new book's being done in a pandemic. It's even trickier, but life goes on. So
it does.
Yeah,
it does. Thank you for engaging this tender topic. I don't know if we solved anything today, but I know that I got my eyes open. I learned a lot from you today, and I really appreciate that. And I suspect that the viewers have learned a lot too. And it's an ongoing conversation. Maybe it's one we'll engage again.
No, thank you. I learned a lot from speaking with you, because you gave me new perspectives on some things, and also you're just willing to to have this and to put it out there. It's the first time I've had an opportunity to really talk about these things.
Yeah, you know what? Me too. Everybody's so afraid to have these conversations. So here's to less fear and more love.
Definitely. Here's to that. Thank you.
Thank you.